Hopefully you all enjoyed our New York US Open vlog last week, but it's back to normal business this week with our review of the Percept 100. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. Okay, back to normal business is a bit of a stretch because I'm obviously not in the normal studio right now. I'm actually at a friend's lake house in Ontario, but hopefully you enjoy the view because it's pretty beautiful out there. I also obviously don't have the Percept 100 with me right now, so you'll either have to imagine it or I'll put it up on the screen. Not sure what I'm going to do with the editing. Don't worry though, the review quality will stay the same. I've extensively playtested the Percept 100 over the last several weeks, so I've got a very good idea as to how it compares to the old VCore Pro 100 and the rest of the Percept line. But of course, as usual, before we go on, remember that any of the products we talk about here you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca, and please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know down in the comment section what you want me to cover next. Plugging the website never changes, no matter the setting. I also just wanted to apologize. I know I put up a poll a couple of weeks ago asking which Percept you wanted me to review next, and the 100D came out on top, but unfortunately they're not yet available in Canada, so that one's gonna have to wait a little. I think you all know how sad that makes me. It's pretty obvious that I really like 100 square inch 18 mainers, but you can't always get what you want. Let's go on to some specs though. They are nearly identical to the outgoing VCore Pro 100s. The racket has a 100 square inch head size, it weighs 300 grams, has a 16x19 string pattern, and 23mm constant beam. It's been a general theme throughout the Percept line and Yonex's new rackets in general, but they've actually lowered the swing weight a little bit to around 317 strong. Now they were able to do that because, like they did on the 97, they added their stiff racket face design tech. It does pretty much exactly what you would expect, stiffens up the hoop, and keeps the throat nice and flexible. Unlike the 97, which came in at a pretty similar RA to the previous VCore Pro, Yonex actually stiffened up the whole Percept 100 pretty substantially from 63 RA to 66. They also replaced vibration dampening mesh with their new dampening tech servo filter, so feel and comfort are definitely important characteristics to talk about here. Let's get into it. Okay, I gotta address this right away, but I am not a robot. Sometimes I don't mesh with a racket. It doesn't happen very often, but I just could not get along with the Percept 100. With that said, I am of course a consummate professional, an absolute artist of my craft. I know how to separate my personal experience with objective performance characteristics, but this section is going to have a little bit of a negative vibe to it. So here's what happened. I loved the previous VCore Pro 100 and absolutely loved the Percept 97, so I was very excited to try this one out, but throughout my playtest, I just felt very disconnected to the racket. I couldn't find the sweet spot on any consistent basis. I added lead tape at 3 and 9 to soften it up a little bit and make it less jarring, and that definitely helped a bit, but it still wasn't perfect. Now don't get me wrong, it's not that the feel is bad, because when I did find the sweet spot, it was actually really good. It's just that sometimes a racket and a player don't mesh, which means the racket isn't right for me, but it could still work for someone else. When you do find the sweet spot, the difference in feel compared to the old VCore Pro 100 is basically what it was with the Percept 97 compared to the old VCore Pro 97, just cranked up even more. It's very crisp. The combination of that stiff racket face design and higher overall stiffness makes for a racket that has a noticeable amount of pop on contact that actually translates to very good feedback. So there is a very well-defined feel in the sweet spot, but when you do make contact outside the sweet spot, it's definitely a little bit stiff and jarring. There have been some discussions about the comfort characteristics on the Percept line, and while I didn't really have any problems with the 97, I definitely had a few more with the 100. Servo filter definitely isn't as good at dampening vibrations as vibration dampening mesh was, which is good for feel, but it also means it's not quite as comfortable. After a few hours of play, my elbow was definitely feeling it a little bit. I still wouldn't say it's an uncomfortable racket or anything like that, but I would be careful with your choice of strings. I went for Alu Power at 53 pounds, which is a really stiff setup, so I would probably go a little bit softer than that. Now, before we go on, I do just want to say that the feel issues I had with this frame were not all that surprising to me because I've never gotten along that well with 100 square inch isometric frames. Something about the transfer of energy from my hand to the contact point has always felt a little bit off. I think it's because the face feels a little bit bigger than 100, so I lose control over that face during the swing. This swing pattern just doesn't really work for me, but for those millions of people out there who absolutely love Yonex 100s, there are a lot of reasons why this racket could be perfect for you. We'll talk about control here in a bit, but the main reason why I think this is such an attractive racket for so many people is because it's a control racket with extremely competitive power and spin characteristics. That's also why I think it's going to be a lot more popular than the 97. Spin is great on the 97, don't get me wrong, it's actually very impressive for something with such a small head size, but this is on a whole other level. It will absolutely not hold you back if you are a big spin player. There is more space between the strings for string movement, more racket head to spin the ball, and especially with the introduction of silicone oil infused grommets, much more snapback than there was on the previous VCore Pro 100. Basically, this is a control racket, yes, but it really comes into its own when you play with modern amounts of spin. That's also probably why I didn't like it so much, because I do have a more punchy, flat style of play. Now, it doesn't force you to play with spin the way something like an Extreme will, but there is no denying that it performs much better for that modern windshield wiper style of play. It isn't as consistent as the 97, so spin is how you're going to add margin to your shots. So obviously I just said it's less consistent than the 97, and that's probably going to raise a few eyebrows, because you're going to start thinking, oh, maybe it's bad for control, but no. It's not bad for control, it's just not as consistent and good for control as something with a smaller head size, which is logical. Like really anything in life, it's a give and take. What you gain in that modern power and spin, you lose out with that classic control. But I do have to say that those 3 extra inches, especially with the isometric head shape, make the sweet spot feel a little big and a little bit imprecise. Now, do take that with a slight pinch of salt, because like I just said, I didn't get along with it that well, so I'm definitely not going to be the guy that tells you it's the most controlled, consistent racket of all time. But even beyond my personal experience, it's noticeably less so than the best control rackets out there. Another reason for its slightly lower control is because of its fairly low stock static and swing weight specs. A bit like it is with the Gravity MP, it has a thin, constant beam, so those low weight specs lead to a little bit of instability. It's nothing major, and you can definitely play it stock, but adding weight will help a lot. I threw on a leather grip and about 4 grams at 3 and 9, and it helped stabilize it big time. It gave it a more consistent launch, a more solid feel on impact, and just generally a better sensation of control over where the ball is going to go. Especially with customization, this racket's control is pretty much better than every other non-constant beam 100 square inch frame out there. Constant beams provide the best control because the racket's flex is so consistent. This racket definitely has that, but I do think it's still a little bit lacking compared to something like the Gravity, which is one of its direct competitors. The Gravity is probably my favorite racket line on the market right now, so I am comparing it to what I consider the true elite. But again, that 100 square inch head size with the isometric shape just feels a little bit big and a tiny bit unpredictable. I've made reference to it a bit already, but kind of like it was with spin, power is also exceptional for a racket with a control profile like this. It's not that it's some sort of rocket launcher or anything like that, but with that stiffer layup and sturdier hoop, the power generating potential really is fantastic and totally different to what you'll get with the 97. You'll notice it most on put away ground strokes, volleys, and especially if you're going for bigger first serves. It just has way bigger potential than the 97. Hopefully that makes sense. It's not only a question of top end power either. You'll get noticeably more easy depth with this racket compared to other control rackets out there. That means that it's a little bit more user-friendly, so much more accessible to intermediates and those players who have a more compact modern stroke. I'm starting to get really good at developing flow with these reviews, because I kind of just introduced who this racket might be best for, but let me define it a little bit more clearly here. The Percept 100 falls firmly into the category of rackets that are made for players primarily looking for control, but willing to sacrifice the least amount of modern power and spin to achieve it. It's pretty obvious that this style of 100 square inch constant beam control rackets is becoming increasingly popular, and for good reason. The all-around playability is top notch. Speed users, gravity users, I'm talking to you. If you like those rackets and want to try Yonex's take on that design, the Percept 100 is pretty much exactly what you should be looking at. It's actually remarkably similar to the Speed in a lot of ways, so I think a direct comparison is going to be coming in the near future. Let me know what you guys think. On a personal note, it may not work for me right now, but because I like the old VCore Pro 100 and the Percept 97, I think it might just be a question of tweaking it to a certain spec before it does work well for me. If I do dial it in, I'll let you know, but for now, it's probably not a racket that'll be in my rotation, and that's okay. Not every racket can work for everyone all the time. That is going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Next week we should be back into the normal studio. I'm not sure what we'll be covering next, but winter is coming, so it might be time for some bubble tennis. How fun. Anyways, I'm gonna go take a dive in the lake now. Remember that if you do want to demo the Percept 100, you can come visit us in store, or you can check it out online at racketsandrunners.ca.